Fantastic. So we are recording now. And hello to everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for our closing ceremony, and also for having been such active participants over the course of the past 3 days of our College of Europe annual student conference on diplomacy. We're very honored to say that we've had over 350 attendees. And for those who are joining now, my name is Hannah Brunt, and I'm a student in the International Relations and Diplomacy program at the College of Europe. And
my name is Philippe Lefebvre, and I'm also a student at the IID department.
And together we're the co-presidents of the College of Europe Young Diplomats Society. The Young Diplomats, together with 5 other student organizations, namely the Eastern Partnership Network, the Economic Diplomacy Society, the Europe Energy Group, European Horizons, and the European Security and Defense Network, have brought together diverse panels and panelists from diplomacy, government, international institutions, journalism, business, and academia to discuss alternative foreign policy over these past days. On Thursday evening, we began our conference learning about the concept of creative diplomacy and discussing the forms and developments of alternative diplomacy from a practitioner's perspective. Then on Friday, we staged a succession of events during which we explored the role of youth and activism in the Eastern Partnership and the possibility for and nature of a geopoliticized European trade strategy. Also, our panelists discussed the impact of the EU's Green Deal and how to further promote gender inclusiveness in foreign policy. Today, we then gleaned an understanding of the concept of technological diplomacy, also coined techplomacy, as well as the globality of cyber aspects and their important role in diplomatic relations. Our last thematic panel, which just closed a couple of minutes ago, investigated the currently heavily debated topic of health and vaccine procurement as a crucial tool for diplomacy and of diplomacy from different institutional perspectives. And now we're extremely excited to host the closing ceremony, during which we brought together a panel of so very well-established diplomats. We look forward to hearing from their deep experiences, but also together with the participants to jointly debate, shape, and create the future of diplomacy in all of its traditional and alternative forms by relying on the insights that we've garnered over the course of this annual student conference on diplomacy. And I'll pass the floor to Philippe, who will introduce our distinguished panelists.
Thank you very much, Hannah. So as Hannah already mentioned, we're very excited today to introduce our panelists for this closing ceremony filled with distinguished practitioners of diplomacy in unique ways. Now, firstly, I'd like to introduce Mr. Van Rompuy, who served as the 49th Prime Minister of Belgium from 2008 to 2009 and was the Emeritus President of the European Council, the first permanent President of the European Council from 2009 to 2014. And since 2019, he has been the President of the Administrative Council of the College of Europe here in Bruges, and we're very excited to hear his words on the geopolitical shifts and the role of the EU. Following this, I will introduce Ambassador Boyan Sharkic. He is a Montenegrin ambassador with a wide range of experiences across his decades as a diplomat. His diplomatic service started firstly in Moscow as part of the Yugoslav embassy, and he's worked with the Montenegrin and the Serbian and Montenegrin missions in the UK, and most recently has served as the head of the Montenegrin mission to the EU and NATO, where he supervised Montenegro's accession to NATO and the continued accession negotiations of Montenegro to the European Union. He joins us as an extremely experienced diplomat, and we look forward to hearing about his experiences in Brussels and around Europe. And last but by no means least, I invite Professor Michael Hryden, currently a distinguished professor at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels in International Security and Diplomacy and an associate fellow at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. This follows a distinguished career in diplomacy, starting in the permanent mission of Austria to the EU until 1998, and was ambassador twice at EU missions, firstly at the EU mission to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, and most recently as EU ambassador to the Republic of Korea from 2017 to 2020. He's been a strong proponent of cultural and public diplomacy across his years as a diplomat, and he'll be speaking to us about his work managing public diplomacy in Korea. So without further ado, I will yield the floor to each of our panelists in turn, after which we'll open to a question and answer session with the attendees. through the chat. So first, I'd very much like to invite Mr. Van Rompuy for his opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, the way the world changes was often war. Today, peace. Peace is the father of everything. Think of the end of the World War I with the fall of the Romanovs, the Habsburgs, and the Hohenzollerns. It was about more than dynasties. A new era dawned with Soviet communism and with the emergence of democracies. The last 30 years saw real dramatic changes, revolutions, without revolutions in the classic sense of violent uprisings. Revolutions without revolutions. The implosion of the Soviet Union and the rise of China, the expansion of the European Union into an institution that brought together 27 countries and 450 million people, the reunification of Germany did not require an uprising. Suddenly, it happened. Today, Russia is only a regional power representing 3% of the world economy. China is the world's first economy in purchasing power parity terms. The United States is still a strong economic and even more military power, but the imperial is gone, and they no longer want to be it themselves, consumed as they are by internal tensions that greatly erode self-confidence. In China, there is a nostalgia for the greatness of centuries ago and the pride or arrogance of the new wealth. In the United States, there is a nostalgia for the greatness of the day before yesterday, without a desire to make any more sacrifices. The European Union has no nostalgia for the colonial empires, and many regret about the European civil wars, but we still fail to properly define our place in the world. But everyone, by the way, is searching for their place. My first question: does the West still exist? A question that Henry Kissinger asked me. Does the West still exist? The West has had to experience shocks. Under President Trump, NATO solidarity in the event of external aggression was questioned. President Biden heralded a return to classic transatlantic solidarity. But the European Union lost much of its trust in the United States because of the volatility of the American policy over the past 20 years. It is, of course, very happy with the return of its greatest partner and friend, but the European Union, it now speaks without complexes about strategic autonomy, about European sovereignty. The West was born out of fear of communism, but the latter no longer exists ideologically. The West is looking for a new enemy. For some it is Russia, for others China, for still others radical Islamism, or all the three of them. Ladies and gentlemen, the Cold War is over. The current nature of the geopolitical tensions is different from those before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Less left-right ideological rift, but more economic rivalry. After all, communism is dead, but not the Communist Party of China. The new battleground is often portrayed as a competition between democracies and authoritarianism, a battle of narratives with an ideological undercurrent. However, there are authoritarian regimes that are anti-Chinese, like Vietnam, and there are democracies that are pro-Chinese, like Pakistan. Democracy is under assault also from inside democratic countries. Unfortunately, This sounds familiar to Europeans and now as well as to Americans, for sure, after January the 6th. This rivalry between the US and China, this competition between democracy and authoritarianism, does not lead to bipolarity or a G2. No single power controls the world, either economically or militarily. Today, there is more multipolarity, or I prefer the term apolarity, without a polar. In my view, it will not lead all this to a new war, as some historians fear, basing themselves on the Thucydides trap, in Greek, Thucydides, in which an old superpower is not prepared to give up its place to a new rising star. Athens that fought Sparta at the time for this reason. In my view, there are no laws in history. Every time is different, and human sciences should not seek too many comparisons with natural sciences. In the world of man, everything flows. Everything flows. A profound difference with the Cold War is that globalization has created over decades a strong economic interdependence between the global actors. And this is in stark contrast to the Cold War, where the Soviet Union and the USA hardly had any economic ties. In this new world, by the way, everyone is looking, as I said, for their place. Everyone. It is the time of sliding panels, sliding panels. A globalization in so many domains: trade, financial flows, internet, culture, sports, entertainment, diseases. So a globalization in so many domains without global governance anymore. The world is becoming more unified in ways of life, but unity itself is further away than ever. The multilateral order has become disorderly, with occasional exceptions, for instance, the Paris agreements, the Paris Accords on climate change. Fortunately, there is more peace, unless in a number of places, especially in the Middle East and North Africa. We talk, instead of real wars, we talk about trade wars and cyber attacks. The globalization of the economy and enormous interdependence has meant that war is almost no longer an option. The supply chains are so closely linked that we need each other, even if we don't like each other. Sometimes the former is more lasting than the latter. Let us not forget that peace in Europe also came about by intertwining the economies. Peace thanks to the economy. And the same thing is now happening on a global scale. Of course, we know that there are no final achievements in history, I know. And of course, we must not become sleepwalkers, I know. There is peace, but there is no trust between global actors. One reason for that lack of trust is violations of international law and cyber attacks on Western countries to undermine democratic elections and destabilize countries. There is no trust because there is nationalism, often nostalgic nationalism, or folding back on oneself. Relations in the world are now mainly economic. The EU is a global actor, but I admit it is not a world power because it lacks that military arm. The EU is not a military alliance, and it was even built against the very idea of power politics. I do wonder what results military interventions have led to. Look at what happened in Afghanistan with the United States and the Soviet Union. Look what happened in Vietnam, in Iraq. Look what happened in Libya, with the European Union, by the way, there has been, of course, the military annexation of Crimea, but most of the time, military interventions led nowhere. Ladies and gentlemen, the balance of power in the world is primarily economic, as I said. China could never play this geopolitical role without having developed its economic power. It's already the world's largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity. Of course, it has also greatly expanded its military power and expenditures, although it's still far behind the United States. Just to give you a few figures. United States defense budget, 684 billion, versus in China, 181 billion in 2019, or 210 billion in 2021. So 680 against 210. The European countries, on aggregate, including the UK this time, even spend more on defense, 290 billion. I recall China 210. But the fragmentation of the military equipment market of the member states prevents that this spending is translated into real military power. The US has one main battle tank and in Europe we are currently operate 16 different types. The Permanent Structure Cooperation, what we call PESCO in our language, the European Defence Agency and the European Defence Fund aim for change. There are new security issues to be addressed, like space and cyberspace. And especially Russia has become very active in this field, targeting not only commercial secrets, but also our democracies. Another question, how is economic globalization going? There is not much the US and China see eye to eye on these days, but they do seem to agree on this. Each should need the other a little less. The same can be said of the European Union, which also wants to be less dependent on China and the US and its gigantic tech companies. Supply chains will also be revised as the three major global players move toward, respectively, technological self-sufficiency, China, strategic autonomy, European Union, or Buy America, United States. It also appears that major global companies are keen on diversifying their risk. For example, it is reported that Apple intends to boost production of key products outside of China, and especially in Vietnam and India. China itself is striving to become less dependent on foreign trade and investment, the two drivers of their economic growth for the last 40 years. This strategy is called dual circulation, with more emphasis than before on domestic demand, inner circulation, and less one-sidedly focused on exports, outer circulation. Since the great financial crisis, trade in goods has grown largely in line with world gross domestic product, GDP, and not faster. And this is unusual. In the decades before the financial crisis, trade grew twice as fast as world GDP, twice as fast. So the high point of globalization is certainly behind us. But no one can escape global interdependence. The European Union is strongly against protectionism. And that is why it concludes free trade agreements with as many countries as Japan, 2019, Vietnam, Singapore, Mercosur, Brazil and Argentina, Korea, and so on. That's why we are negotiating with Australia. And we just concluded an in-principle investment agreement with China against the wishes of the new US administration. However, Given the current tensions between the EU and China, rapid ratification is out of the question. Sometimes it is a narrow path between protecting your own interests and avoiding protectionism. I admit that. The EU, nevertheless, must continue to present itself as a defender of multilateralism and rule-based trade, but without what the French would call naivete. Without naivete. We are in favor of free and fair trade, but you need both. Not only free, but also fair. You need a level playing field. We remain overwhelmingly opposed to trade wars and protectionism. That's clear. Two recent policy papers of the Commission on multilateralism and a new trade policy confirm this trend. Let me zoom in on our relationship with China. I already spoke about it. Without a free trade agreement, trade with China developed in such a way that China has become, after Brexit, our largest trading partner in 2020, before the US and before the UK. Among European countries, Germany is the most important in terms of trade and investment. Our relationship with China is very diverse and also complex. China is a partner, climate change, Paris Accords, the Iran nuclear deal. China is a competitor, also in new areas of competition in cyberspace, in artificial intelligence, in biotechnology. And China is a systemic rival when it comes to values and to global governance. The EU's attitude towards China is inspired by these three components, but also by a double approach: firmness and dialogue. Firm on our principles, but always ready for dialogue and cooperation. And the third component, after firmness and dialogue, is strategic autonomy. It's a new guiding principle of our foreign policy, European foreign policy. This will make the EU much less dependent on other global actors in many areas, such as technology, energy, defense, migration, battery cells, microprocessor chips, medical material, and so forth and so forth. The EU does not want to keep the US and China at an equal distance. For that, the ties with the US, especially with the current president, are too strong. In reinvigorating the transatlantic alliance, the US and the EU can cooperate on political, security, and economic China issues, defending, for instance, the principles of fair and rules-based trade. But the EU itself decides where we work together and where we do not. The time of, again, what the French would call suivisme, just following, is long gone, is long over. The EU does not want to be drawn into a new Cold War of great power rivalry, or a policy of decoupling economies and isolationism. One reason, of course, is China's economic importance for the European Union. But again, I want to add nuances. Let us look at the figures. We are not on the whole as dependent on China as many think. For instance, only 7% of German exports of goods go to China. And Germany is the biggest European exporter to China. In terms of added value, German exports to China in 2015 represented 2.8% of the total added value of its exports. What about global Europe? The European Union already today plays a role in the world, in world politics, through the instruments it has regarding our trade, our free trade agreements on all continents. We play a big role due to the euro, the world's second payments currency, and perhaps soon also an investment product as a result of the issuance of European bonds. We play a world role on climate change, We play a big role due to our single market, the largest in the world, to our development aid, half of the world's development aid, and through our foreign direct investments. And I give you a few figures to make that clear. Let me recall that in the 6 years between 2013 and 2018, the EU provided 410 billion in official development assistance worldwide, compared to China, 34. 410 against 34. Even under China's flagship Belt and Road Initiative, funded by public debt, not grants, stood at 464 billion estimated by the World Bank. Only in development aid, we are providing, as a European Union, 410. The EU is by far the largest source of foreign direct investment, with a total stock of 11 trillion compared to China 1.9 trillion, 10 times more. The EU has been and remains a connectivity superpower, both at home and abroad. But we do not need to think of ourselves in these terms and draw on these strengths to frame and execute a strategic approach, working with the private sector, the EU development banks, and other public financial institutions, and the EU member states. The Union is not sufficiently conscious on how strong a global economic player it is for many years already. The internal market, as I said, is the largest in the world. Anyone who wants to sell goods or services here needs to abide by European rules, because they are extremely strict and well enforced. I'm referring to the so-called Brussels effect. In those rules, European values are enshrined, such as provisions on climate change, good governance, and human rights. Companies from Asia to Latin America beg their governments to copy EU rules so that they won't face multiple regulatory regimes. Europe can only play a real geopolitical role if it has sufficient strategic autonomy. And in this regard, digital dependence is a real handicap. Ladies and gentlemen, among the 15 largest digital companies in the world, there is not a single European one. There is still a lot of work to be done here. It's an understatement. The current European Commission is determined to win the battle for industrial data after we lost it for personal data. The new digital legislation pending in Parliament should also give us another regulatory grip around the companies operating in our territory and restore a level playing field among all digital companies. They will also have to pay taxes here. Digital sovereignty is an absolute requirement. In general, a country or an entity is only autonomous if it is competitive. We can only do the latter if we join forces. In today's world, size matters, scale matters. By the way, that is a dramatic mistake of the UK. Europe can only be a geopolitical power if it is relevant in its own neighborhood, in the Mediterranean, in North Africa, and in fact, in the whole of Africa. We are far too little of that today. Today, 1 human being in 6 lives in Africa. By 2050, that will have risen to 1 in 4. And by the end of the century, to more than 1 in 3. It means 4 billion people, almost as many as Asia. A huge potential, or a huge threat for us and for them. On the short term, 270 million are threatened with famine as a result of COVID-19, making 2020 the worst year in terms of humanitarian situation since World War II. The European Union can only play a geopolitical role if it acts in unison. It is already doing so on trade, on climate, Brexit, sanctions against Russia and China. But more is needed. It should also not be the case that one country prevents us from having a common European position. If necessary, treaty should be adjusted for that. Europe can only play a role in the world when it is internally strong. Everything that strengthens our internal cohesion also strengthens Europe's position in the world. And Europe can only play a role in the world when our societies are stable, when people feel better protected against all kinds of threats, such as those that have been coming at us one after the other over the past 15 years. When Europeans become more people of hope, then we are strong and not people of fear. The European Union cannot play a role in the world if the populists in large countries come to power and block the path to greater cooperation and integration. That role in the world should not be seen only in terms of power, although we in the EU still think too little strategically and have often been naive, thinking or hoping that others will eventually have to accept our values. Here too, we are changing. We are losing our innocence. We have to think more about our interests, but we also should not forget our specificity. A community of peace, of political democracy, and of eco-social market economy. That is what makes us special. That's what makes us exceptional. Geopolitics must also be guided by that, not to impose that model on other countries, but support those values around the world. For that matter, we must also defend these ideals within the European Union, within the European Union itself, just as the United States must do it internally. To conclude, we live with our societies and with our civilizations in a time of transition, but no one knows where that transition will lead. In times of uncertainty, therefore, one must stick to one's principles, to one's raison d'être. That is what I propose to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rompuy, for your excellent speech about the geopolitical shifts in the world and related to the European Union. We're very happy to have heard your intervention on the matter. Now I'd like to invite Ambassador Sharkic for his intervention.
Do you hear me, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Well, hi to everybody. Let me thank you first for this invitation, and let me wish you all the best at the end of your bourgeois period, if I can say like that, and entering in your diplomatic lives, coming back to actually where you are coming from. I will focus a little bit on a different things, more let's say coming from our practical experience of a diplomat, who has on his back nearly 30 years of a very, I would say, excited, not to say stressful period. Stressful period, when I say it happens that my career started in Moscow in period of perestroika during the period of Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, and ended with the dismantling of the Soviet Union, with the dismantling of Yugoslavia, and quite a chaotic situation on the Western Balkans in that period, in the end of at the beginning of the 90s of the previous century. But before I give you a little bit of all these hints for our young friends who are willing and wishing to enter in this diplomatic life, I would like to give them a couple of hints, which might you find them interesting. But at the end of the day, it always depends on your personal experience, personal, let's say, preferences, and of course, some kind of a destiny where the life or your profession will takes you. So in our business, there are a few unwritten rules which somehow is repeating in every diplomatic system, I would say. One of these rules is, don't think that you will do what you are expecting to do or hope. So to translate that, if you are really want to do maybe the bilateral diplomacy or multilateral or European Union or UN or just name it, that does not mean that you will end up there. It means you could end up completely in a different direction that can determine your completely different destiny in your life as well. That depends on the administration, all different things. So this is, I would say, the rule number one. The rule, it's not a rule, but let's say the hint number two, as a young diplomat preparing to leave your ministry to go abroad, you are sure that you are going to your assignment only really when you see or feel that airplane really takes off. Because until the last minute, you are never sure, are you going there? What will happen? Is there anything which will interrupt? I'm always talking about professional things and the things how dynamic and changeable are in one of the ministries, in ministries of foreign affairs. Rule number three would be that you are really becoming, let's say, full diplomat once you are coming back from your first posting. When you are in the ministry, that is, you are following some of the portfolios, you are doing very well, you have meetings, etc., but you really are gaining your own diplomatic experience once you are abroad, once you are serving within your mission or embassy, and seeing really how these things are working and functioning. Also, one thing which is not unimportant is when the minister, your boss, actually big boss, is coming to visit, to pay the visit to the country where do you service, where do you work. It's always nice to be there. It's always nice to be with him because, you are listening different things, you can learn, you see how the politics is getting created, etc. But the best thing is when you see him flying off, because then it's the huge stress and release of everybody. And we used to say the very nice smell is the smell of kerosene of the airplane when the minister is leaving. But before all these things, there is also one thing which is quite important to know in our business, and that's the preparation to go abroad, to go on your posting. So you will know what, like French would say, what are your objectives. You will prepare yourself very well. You will learn that your limits are as a young person. There are certain limits in this business, because there is always a big boss in front of you who has this practically papers signed by the president or the head of the state, who is extraordinary and plenipotentiary powers to represent your own country. So you will have to really obey what the regulations and the rules of that business. But when you get prepared yourself to leave, then maybe quite important thing is where, of course, where do you go? Yeah, well, what is the position? Where is that geographically? What are you going to see there, etc., etc. But maybe the most important thing is, who is your boss? Who is the ambassador? How are you going to work with him? What is his modus operandi? What kind of a person is the ambassador? He or she, of course. So that is also important. And my friendly advice would be always, do a little research, ask the colleagues, who is there, what kind of the person is that, is he or she, because you can feel very nice in the not interesting place, but you can feel also not very nice in a very nice place. So this is the part of let's say little things which as a young diplomat everybody should think about that. This is more or less an advice of an older colleague who was all the time being the youngest person in the mission, and suddenly I became the oldest. So this is all our destiny, and of course you are trying to pass what your experience to younger colleagues and to give them the opportunity to fly, to do their job, not to put them in a kind of a frame, or don't want to say a cage, where they will not feel that they are free to do their job and to contribute to the mission. Because success of the ambassador is success of the whole mission, as well as the success of every single diplomat who is down there. So I was always saying to my people in the mission, your success is my success, but your failure is not your failure, it's my failure. So after that, I would like to tell you a few things, how it looks like to be the ambassador of a very small country, which is, for me, bigger than China. Of course, small Montenegro with 620,000 or 650,000 population, and with something 13,000+ square kilometers, which means that it is only 500 square kilometers bigger than Flanders, for comparison, but has 10 times less population than Flanders. So how we were doing, what were our priorities, and through what we were going through in this short period of time of our regaining of our statehood, with the dismantling of Yugoslavia, of Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia in 90s, and the bloody war which was spreading all over the Western Balkans. Montenegro managed somehow to avoid all these bloodsheds and practically to gain their own independence in referendum in 2006, with the help of the European Union, of course. Everything was more or less happening in Brussels, and yesterday I was listening one of the panelists. Excuse me, I forgot her name, but she was doing together with Mrs. Mogherini, talking about from the theorist, from the academic point of view, what kind of diplomacy you have, and then she was pointing that as a subject of the diplomacy there is There is also important role of the people who are appointed with certain tasks to do so. And we have in that time the involvement of High Representative Mr. Javier Solana, who was handling, let's say, the whole process of referendum in Montenegro. So we managed to do that, and then of course we decided to go through the further on the path of the European integration and Euro-Atlantic integration. And in this short period of time, we did very well. We managed to, let's say, become a leader in the European integration, and we became a member of the NATO. And thanks to the EU and thanks actually to the process of the accession, practically you see the country which is changing in front of your eyes in every positive way. Of course, that is not easy. I'm calling that the changing of the software in the heads of the citizens of Montenegro. It's not so easy to switch to all these standards, to all this legislation which we have to implement and adjust it to the in our legislation system and level it with the acquis communautaire. From just to give you an idea about this process, because even the appointing of the ambassador to the EU is different of the appointing of the ambassadors of the member states, as you probably know. Well, member states, they are practically perm reps, so they are nominated by their own governments, and they from the day of when they arrive to Brussels, they are in fully function, more or less. For the other ambassadors who are coming from different countries, like myself, we had to go through the procedures similar to the procedure when you are accredited or when you are getting accreditation with some other countries on a bilateral level. So we would send the note to the council. The council will send our note for agreement, so-called agreement, to the member states, and then in 6 to 8 weeks you will get the answer. Okay, you can come here and you can start to work and present your credentials to the president. In my case, that was President Tusk, which I presented my credentials to him. So that is also different. And then you're starting to deal with the accession process, with the enlargement, and just we are now in June will be full 9 years we are negotiating, and that was practically the first time that the new way of accession process, or let's say methodology, was imposed, where correctly the main issue would be the rule of law, the chapter 23 and 24. So we got 35 chapters, or to be more precise, 33 chapters, which you are negotiating, and then you have to open each and every one, and then as you are fulfilling certain things, the chapters are getting close, or you're getting closer to the end. But now, okay, I don't want to enter and to bother you a lot with that. But at the end of the day, there is a lot of things what you have to do at home, or actually the whole process it has to be fulfilled at home. You are acting here, or the mission or the ambassador with his team is acting like intermediary between the Commission and between your own government. You have to convince your government in certain things, to present certain things what it has to be done, because the ministers, different ministers, they are not obliged to know really all these things which we are supposed to do it through our accession process. But nevertheless, in the every day of your work, you have behind you 10 negotiators, or we had, in our case, we had 10 negotiators who were handling 33 working groups, for every working group for one chapter. And then we had the chief negotiator who was handling that at home. In total, between 1,000 and 400 people who were involved on everyday basis. I had here in Brussels circa 20 people who were people from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the other ministries. And of course, it was not my and that is absolutely not possible that you do everything and that you go in every single thing. You have your colleagues, your people who are running all these portfolios, and ambassador would coordinate that and take care about the politics, what is the part of each and every chapter, and how to put in life all these things at home. So this is the for somebody that is quite a boring business, but in the other hand, it is very important thing for the countries who are in the accession process. And of course, on the other hand, you have your colleagues from the member states. They're younger colleagues who you usually are following these portfolios and then informing their bosses what is going on. And at the end of the day, everything ends up with the politics. Everything ends up in the diplomacy, but not the diplomacy, the classical one, because the diplomacy is also for when young person sit in the Ryanair and goes to Montenegro for a week, and then he spend a week, nice week there, go hiking or on the coast, and then he see that what kind of people we are, what kind of the reforms we are doing, what kind of the nature we are, what kind of the culture we have. Learn that we are using euro as a currency as well. And then when you come back, then in a certain momentum, it will be a public opinion. What do you think about this, Montenegro? Will you join them? Are you happy that Montenegro will join the European Union, that will go in every country? Yeah, okay, I'm talking about the process, which I hope will come in a few years. And then, of course, that is kind of also the thing which is extremely important, that the people of the citizens of the European Union knows more about the accession country, what are we doing, how we are doing, what kind of the people, what kind of the culture, sports, etc., etc. So therefore, this is our role to present this. This is our role to talk to people as much as we can. And then I'm coming to this disastrous of COVID-19, which actually is killing our business. The diplomacy on the through the web cameras or computers, that's not how the thing should be working. It's very difficult. The diplomacy is everyday contact, everyday learning, everyday talking, everyday presenting your things, and everyday trying to lobby on the behalf of your country. What are the interests of your country or of the process, what you are doing. So this is.
Thank you so very much for these many points that you have raised. We actually would very much like to ask another question about the impact of COVID-19 on diplomacy, and we'll get to that as soon as we have heard all of the opening statements. And with this, I would like to yield the floor to distinguished Professor Hryden for his introductory intervention.
Thank you very much, and my pleasure to be with you. And congratulations to President Van Rompuy for his presidential speech. I think he put it exactly where we are. And I will perhaps continue a little bit where he ended, because my job as a 2 times EU ambassador, first to Switzerland and then to Korea, was to bring the message around which he was referring to, trying to show that we are a global actor, that we have our own opinion, our own positions. He referred to Swivism. Well, in Asia, that's called karaoke diplomacy. So that's not what we want to do. And what I intend to show you a little bit with a few slides also, how you translate the messages President Van Rompuy was outlining and trying to get it across an audience which might not necessarily be familiar with the European Union. So I made there perhaps at the beginning I will say just a few words about public diplomacy without getting into a lecture on the public diplomacy. But I would like to show you that how you can approach the issue. So public diplomacy is refers to a process where you try to get directly to the audience of another country, the public, the government, the media. And you are doing this not only in the old traditional way to talk about politics, but we have to see many things here now, commercial, economic, cultural, educational, scientific, environmental, tech, cyber, digital, and so on. And I have seen in your program that you have dealt with these issues already. What is important, there's sometimes a misunderstanding. Public diplomacy is not propaganda. The best propaganda is no propaganda, because that gives you credibility. Public diplomacy is as much about listening as it is about talking. It's about understanding and it's about explaining. Public diplomacy is communication and not just the dissemination of information. There's a big difference between the two. And it is, after all, a battle of ideas where the better argument shall win, not the stronger army, not the richer, not the more privileged one. And it is a battle of narratives, especially nowadays, where fake news has outlived President Trump. Now, I served 2 times as an EU ambassador, and in 2 countries where the situation of the European Union was quite different. In Switzerland and in Liechtenstein, they knew very well what the European Union is. Well, they were surrounded by the European Union, and there was perhaps a sort of love-hate relationship. If there are some Swiss among the audience, you know what I'm talking about. But the idea was to be the face of the European Union and to get the message across. And that was also where I met first time President Van Rompuy when he came as President of the Council to Switzerland. On the other pictures you see, as I was the first ambassador to Switzerland, I could choose the office. And it was important for me to choose an office which was opposite the Ministry of Finance. So the European flag was flying in front of the headquarters of Swiss financial power. But I want to concentrate more on my recent experience, the Republic of Korea, where I found myself in a completely different situation because Koreans don't know very much about the European Union. They don't know how we are functioning. They don't know the interplay between the institutions, and they are not particularly interested in it. So how can you explain, how can you work in such an environment? Well, you work with a delegation. I had 25 staff mixed from the European Union, 7 nationalities, and a lot of Korean staff. And interestingly, by the way, the great majority of the Korean staff was female staff because they liked to work for the European Union because, comparatively speaking, we were a very good and social employer with reasonable office hours, which also allowed many of my colleagues there to be carrying mothers at the same time. Well, you do as an ambassador there a little bit of the usual work of an EU ambassador. You coordinate, you work together with your colleagues on the level of ambassadors, or as you can see here, the councillors, to make sure and trying to make sure that we are singing all from the same hymn sheet. So public diplomacy is important because you have to get the message across, but you have to start from the premises that you're speaking to an audience which does not really know what you are talking about. And there are quite some hurdles. One, of course, is language. Unfortunately, we don't get language training before we are sent somewhere. And then you arrive there, and then when you want to do public diplomacy, you find out that what you are used to do doesn't work. Because there you are in a Korean language environment. So you don't Google, you have to neighbor. And in order to get into the neighbor system, you have to try to translate as much from English into Korean. So if somebody is neighboring the European Union, that he or she finds information in Korean. And you can imagine that the majority of the Koreans, they prefer to look up information in Korean and not in English, in French, in German, Italian, or whatever. And 24 languages which we have in the European Union are not terribly helpful because it's not Korean. And then it's not WhatsApp, it's Kakao Talk. So you have to see that you get into the Kakao Talk, because if you are in Kakao Talk, you get to the heart and to the ear of your interlocutors. So you can impress politicians, you can impress ministers, and they say, I am on Kakao. And then there is another problem. If you are the ambassador of a member state, you can sell your country. You can sell your country. You have here the Grand Place, you have Florence, you have the Eiffel Tower, you have Mozart, and people will know what you are talking about. What is the situation of a poor EU ambassador? He has to talk about the European Union, an abstract. Well, we have a nice flag, but for the rest, as Jacques Delors was already saying, you don't fall in love with a single market. And I think it's a little bit the same for Korean publics. So in order to get visibility, you have to try to create events. So one event is, of course, official visits. Well, it's not by coincidence that I have chosen these two pictures. When my representative at the time was coming to Korea, and we visited Panmunjom at the time.
Professor Reiter, can you quickly clarify which slide you're on? Because it moves independently. I need you to tell me which slide we're moving to. Which slide is we're on?
We are now official visit visibility appreciation, the one with High Representative Mogherini.
Okay. Do you know what number that is? Sorry.
Yeah, it was, I think it was number 22, I think, something like this.
22. Okay.
Yes.
There we are. Yep.
Yes.
Please continue, and let me know when you want to move slide.
Okay, move on. Next one. Well, you cannot have a visit all the time, so you have to create events normally. And good events are, and this is especially true in Asia, when you have anniversaries. 55 years of diplomatic relations between the European Union and the Republic of Korea. That's an event that you can create. Or 10 years of EU-Korean strategic partnership. So you create that event, and to make it more visible, and I did not go to a company and told them, please give me design for me a logo. I made a competition 2 times. At the first one, I made a competition among high school students, and one of these girls here, 15 years old, came up with this design 55. She became the absolute star of the school, and she also became a little star in Korean media. A similar event, this was already at the time of the pandemic. I had to organize a competition, online competition for a logo. And a young designer, she came up with this design, and then it was presented to the public. It was presented with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They made a nice little video, which was then on YouTube, which I don't show you, but you can see it here where it is. And that also helped to explain what the European Union stands for. Next one. Another possibility is to make a model European Union. You know these games. We were organizing that on a big scale. We created an audience of high school students. So altogether, more than 100 students and high school students participated in the event, which lasted for 1 day. And I think at the end, they understood a little bit what the European Union was all about. Next. Then you also have to try to pick up on local trends. I mean, Asians in general, they love characters. And so I picked up on Pengsu. Pengsu is terribly well known in Korea. It is an it. It is an it which came from the Atlantic, somehow from the Antarctic, somehow through Switzerland. Therefore, this poor guy knows yodeling, and became extremely popular. So I was luckily invited at ringing the bell at the beginning of the new year, together, as you can see here, with Pengsu. Well, that brought me into TV with about more than 10 million people watching. And then I got this little Pengsu, and I was using Pengsu all the time in my communication, because when Pengsu was on the picture, I got many likes. And I was perfectly aware it was not me, it was Pengsu. Next. Well, you work traditionally with the media. You have to make sure that you get into the English-speaking media at least, or that, like the morning special, that you are interpreted automatically. So, but this is traditional work, but it's also important. Next. Then you have to translate the main messages. President Van Rompuy was mentioning, for example, the issue of climate change. Well, climate change is extremely important. So you give speeches, you participate, you organize conferences. Or on the right side here, you see the picture. There I went to the parliament, and I spent 3 hours with members of parliament. And I can say it had the effect that a Korean Green Deal 2 or 3 weeks before the election made it into the election program of the ruling party. So sometimes it helps, and it's rewarding if you see that sometimes a lot of talking also has some effect. Next. Climate change, environment is a big issue. These are just small examples. My official car was an electric car. We organized together with the mayor of Seoul a car-free day. Well, a car-free day in Seoul is quite different from Brussels, for example, because in Brussels there are no cars. In Seoul they close a little segment of the city, but at least you get into the media and you get the message across. Or beach cleaning. People look at you, what are these crazy people doing, walking up and down the beach? Of course, with media with us, and we had also invited university students to join us, so we got into the media. The same, one of the biggest bakeries in the country had one day that they promised not to use plastic in wrapping. So I went to the bakery, I made my shopping, and I made sure that somebody was following me, taking a few pictures and getting the message into the media. Next. Other issues are human rights. Well, everything related to LGBTI is a problem in Korea, so we were pushing for that. And there I got also, as in the booth for the festival, the American ambassador. So he has a higher visibility than the European ambassador, I must say, so it was good to have him on board. Talking about values, Korea still has the death penalty, but they have a de facto moratorium. So I was giving many speeches together with colleagues. This is the one at the parliament, Korean parliament, and arguing, well, change the de facto moratorium to a de jure moratorium. Next. Human rights, non-discrimination. We were using, all my colleagues, the Paralympics in order to pass the message on non-discrimination. You have to bring handicapped people into the society. So we did not care about the normal Olympics, that's big money, but Paralympics, that was extremely important. Next. You have to reach out. You have to reach out to artists, and then you see a nice reward. You can probably recognize these two. And then also reaching out to those you normally don't think about it, military cadets. And then I went to the National Defense University and also tell them about the European Union. They have never heard of it. I was the first ambassador to ever go there, but they were extremely interested. And if you are the first one, it's always good, whatever you do. Next one. The same applies to the cooperation with Korea. They are participating in the Operation Atalanta, fighting piracy off the coast of Somalia. So when they sent their battleship and it left from Korea to go to the Horn of Africa, I visited them in the ceremony when they were leaving the port. Again, just make sure a few pictures are taken. Just make sure the TV and the media are aware of it. Next one. Well, you can do that in other areas too. This is just the example of research, extremely important. Korea is leading, and we have to catch up with them and cooperate with them. Next one. You have to go to companies. We were organizing exhibitions. I was talking with in youth camps. I was talking at universities. Next one. Music and culture, extremely important, because this is something where Europe, the European culture is very well known. For the 9th of May, as we could not have any formal receptions last year, I organized a virtual concert with 4 outstanding Korean musicians. It was on the web, and I recommend you to listen to it. It's really nice. Next one. Sports. Again, you have to make use what is there. You see on the right side the mascots of the Winter Olympics. Get your picture, participate in a race, and next one, get into sports diplomacy and talk about it. The Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang Olympics were extremely important, also with North Korea. Next one. It will play a further role. We will have the Tokyo Summer Olympics. Well, nobody will from abroad will look at them, but then it happens to be in 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. So this is something to build on, but you have to make sure that you can get your hand on the issue. Next one. Then you have parliamentary diplomacy. Going to the parliament, making sure that the delegation from the European Parliament is meeting with the Koreans is extremely important because it adds an additional dimension. Next one. City diplomacy. That is also one of the issues where the European Union is very active. The Covenant of Mayors. So I was working very closely with the mayor of Seoul. Because there are more and more direct contacts among the mayors, they talk about their problems directly. And if you don't pay attention, they cut out the whole foreign ministries. They make the show amongst themselves, which is fine. But if you're part of the show, you increase your visibility and you can pass on messages. Next one. Well, pandemic, of course, that was also part. Exchange of views at the very beginning. I was there in March, April, May of last year. Korea was extremely effective. So getting the two parts to talk each other was an important part of diplomacy and also of public diplomacy. Next one. Well, if you show off, then sometimes you get a reward. You get a reward as a public diplomacy ambassador, or at the end, before leaving, I got the honorary citizenship of the city of Seoul, which gives me the privilege to use public transport in Seoul until the end of my days. So I'm really looking forward to that one. Next one. Well, diplomacy is changing. First change, we had relationship court to court, city to city. Then from 1648, we have heads of governments to governments according to protocol. We had next Congress of Vienna, which was the beginning of multilateral diplomacy. Next. And we have the growing importance, as we have discussed, and we have more and more players. And this more and more players makes it, I think, the profession more interesting. You can go through all the different levels and you have completely new players. You have the provinces and cities, as we have mentioned. You have to work with international media or with media. Foundations are getting more and more important. The Bill and Linda Gates Foundation, they have a budget which is bigger than of many, many states in the world. So if you get into contact with them, that helps. You have nowadays the so-called influencers on the social media. So you have to get into touch with them and try to get them for your purposes. And communication instead of providing information, and social media instead of website. I think that shows a little bit where we are. And I think this is, so social media, that's the addition. And it's not something which happens. You have to plan it, you have to do it, and you have to be very conscious that it is very useful. Next one. And here we go again with Peng Su and Peng Ha. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Professor Hryden, for coming in there with your work there, public diplomacy in Korea. Well, now we've heard interventions from all three of our panelists. We now have a few questions that have been submitted to us privately, or ones that Hannah and myself have thought of. And one that I think we'd like to hear from all three of the panelists is, how can we make sure that Europe, not just the EU, but also Europe's neighbours in the Western Balkans and near abroad, are more united and resilient? Now, this is not just in more political terms, but also yielding to what Professor Hryden said in providing information across the world. How can we make sure that Europe is more resilient and united? Now, Ambassador Sharkic, because we unfortunately had to cut you off, I think I would like to go to you first for this question. And I'll just make sure you can speak now.
Yeah, well, that is a very important thing, because it is not easy to coordinate 28 or 27 now countries with all different views, interests, and situations. Then how are you gonna adjust the others? Let's say 6 countries of the Western Balkans, not talking about the others. Not simple, but as much as we are seeing each other, as much as we are exchanging informations, as much as we are having common meetings and to know each other and to exchange the experience on different things, that is the only way how we can face all the challenges which are today does not recognize any borders or political systems, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. Either Mr. Rompuy or Professor Reiterer, would either of you want to answer next? Just let me know and I'll unmute you. Yep, please.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I understood rightly the question, because you have different ways of tackle it and you have different levels of unity. You have the unity at the level of the leaders, and that's the unity at the level mostly of the European Council. And often is said, yeah, but it's difficult to get to an agreement, to a compromise. There is a lot of disunity, many of different opinions, interests, and so on. But that is in every country or in every entity. Look at the United States. They have one president, one parliament, and the country is completely divided, And they have only one language, by the way. We have 23 or 24 languages. And what we have seen the last 15 years is that we faced major crises. Some of the crises were existential ones. It was the survival of the Union which was at stake, and for sure in the Eurozone crisis. We overcame each time this major hurdle. It happened in the Eurozone crisis. It happened in the refugee crisis with the agreement we made with Turkey. We were very united, to the big surprise of your British compatriots, Philip. We were very united from day one after the referendum. And we showed our unity also on deciding this major recovery fund of 750 billion euros. And it was a surprise for everybody. We surprised even ourselves. And so there's much more unity than is often mentioned and talked about. Of course, in a dictatorship, there is always unity until the system is falling apart. Look at the Soviet Union. It was very united until it was falling apart, and it doesn't exist anymore. So in the European Union, the lively democracies, everything is public. Everything is public. All the opinions are very well known. And then we have to compromise. When you enter the room of the European Council, you know that you have to compromise. And that's also something that is applicable to the German Chancellor or the French President or whatever. They have not the final say. We need a compromise. At the level of citizens, yeah, all our societies, all national societies, are also fragmented, individualized. Yeah, I think in the Netherlands now they have 17 parties represented in the parliament. 17. In my country, which is a quite divided country, with our two communities, we have only 11, and each party is split. So we have, in my case, Flemish-speaking Christian Democrats and French-speaking. The Netherlands, they don't have that problem. There's only one language, and they have much more parties than we have. So that, and I love the Netherlands, by the way. That's not the problem. So showing that division and fragmentation is something that is very this became a characteristic for our type of societies. And of course, you have that same in the European Union, and with our 27 member states, with our 24 languages, and so on. But when people are traveling outside the European Union and they come back in the Union, they see the difference. Then they see we are at home. We are at home. Could be that the British have less that feeling than many others. But unfortunately, they left us. But many, when they came from other continents and landing in one of the European states, they feel this really is a difference. So there's a negative argument, but the negative argument is also an argument. But we have to work hard on this European identity. And my last word is, don't despair about this. We are a young entity. We are not a nation, but we are a young entity. France exists for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. In Germany, of course, the reunification of Germany in the 19th century and later on, a few decades ago, but the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation exists for centuries and centuries. So the European Union is work in progress. You have to look to all those things in an historical perspective. I know that we live in the time of impatience, but I'm not impatient. When you see what the way we have already gone since 1950 and today, it's just amazing, just amazing. So don't despair. We are not united, but we are more united than 50 or 70 years ago.
Well, let me add on to President Van Rompuy. Even with younger institutions, the European Diplomatic Service, 10 years. So, but I think that one of the reasons that the External Action Service is functioning relatively well is the work at the delegations. We have 140 delegations worldwide. We have 140 colleagues who are all talking with their members, with the member states, and trying to create this European narrative, which is then transported to the host country. And I think that has quite an impact, and it does not mean that our member states don't have a role in diplomacy. No, on the contrary. But if we have 15 embassies and everybody is saying something more or less the same, that makes an impact. And therefore, our coordination role there is crucial. And I have seen that with colleagues in Switzerland and in Korea. We were always united, and we were even sometimes united against the capitals, because these stupid guys back in capitals, they don't understand what's going on, but we know it much better. And that created the friendship amongst us, but it also helped to pass on the message. So I think this is something which I would not underestimate. We have to do more, and 10 years is young, but 10 years, and it's filled with adults, is a long time. On the other hand, you can learn in 10 years, but I'm looking forward to observe the next 10 years.
Thank you so much for your interventions. And Ambassador Sharkic, you had mentioned in your opening speech that the sizes of each of the countries that you represent are quite important. And in this regard, we're very interested in learning how, as a small nation, that Montenegro, Belgium, and also Austria is, you have used strategies to wield power in the global arena. We would be very interested in hearing from all three of you how you have attempted to do this. Whoever would like to go ahead is very welcome to do so.
they will overcome their hesitation. My first remark is there are no small countries. There are only countries. And I learned this lesson from one of my predecessors as prime minister, and said, I never say I'm representing a small country, because we are all equal. And I had that experience in the European Council. We were there. I know that some think that they are more equal than others. But we can raise our voice, we can give our opinion, and there's also, you are part of a club, and everybody is listening to everybody. And in the European Union, by the way, in the European Council, each country has a veto right. They can block the decision, and we have seen it recently, that two countries, and one is medium-sized and another is what you call a small country. They blocked the decision of the European Council, and then finally a compromise was found, and so on and so on. So we are working via consensus. We can decide on a range of issues by what we call a qualified majority. Let's say a 2/3 majority. But even if we can decide in that way, we try each time to decide unanimously. And most of the time it succeeds. It succeeds. And therefore there is a culture of consensus, a culture of compromise in the European Union. And then this difference between bigger and smaller countries is not evaporating, but is less obvious than you can imagine. How can a representative of a small country be big, so to speak? It depends also on persons. It depends on the quality of ambassadors. It depends on the quality of leaders. Let's say the personalities can play a big role in international gatherings, and of course in the European Union. And speaking now for future diplomats, or those who have the vocation to become a diplomat, when you are even representing a small country, when you have something meaningful to say, when you bring some added value in a discussion, then they're not asking you, are you from Montenegro or for Malta or for Cyprus? You have an opinion. You have an opinion. And you shouldn't underestimate this. Quality is of the highest importance in that kind of meetings, in that kind. And so a small country can be big via its representatives at the level of leaders or the level of ambassadors or at other levels.
Well, let me add again a practical examples. One of the jobs in Korea was to fight, and I use the term fight with my Korean friends, to open the market for European beef. Agricultural products are always extremely important, but only about 4 or 5 countries were actually interested or able to export beef. But I was going there as the representative of the European Union, and I was talking with the whole force of the European Union, and not just the Netherlands, who wanted to export beef, or just France to export the beef. So the Europeanization, I think, is an important element. If you are able to make your national case a European case, and it is pushed on the international level as a European issue, then you, as a smaller country representative or a small country, you multiply your weight. And I think this is one of the solidarity effects of the European Union, which is important and which takes place nearly on a daily basis when you're working at a delegation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely true. Yeah.
Something.
Sharkic?
Yeah.
If you'd like to.
When I said maybe I was not understood correctly. I was saying that I'm coming from the small country. Montenegro is a small country, but for me, my small country is the biggest China, which means that, you know, all our interests are, we have, you know, we are presenting them as much as best as we can, and it is important for us, every single thing. But the situation at the moment, while we were negotiating all different things in last few years, has been changed within the European Union. Yes, it is correct that there is a consensus at the end of the day, which sometimes is very difficult to reach, and we saw that especially for the when we had questions about the Western Balkan countries opening the negotiations with Northern Macedonia and Albania, and the questions about the visa regime for Kosovo. But I can tell you that while we were negotiating certain things, the most important voices were coming mainly from two countries, from France and from Germany. When once we had the confirmation from the Germany and France, Belgium would jump immediately on that train, as well as the Netherlands, and it would be done everything smoothly. So yes, consensus is there, but the leader countries are there, and you know, if you want to achieve something, you would have to do very, very strong push and a lot of work towards all the members, but especially towards France and Germany. That's from the practice.
Mm-hmm. May I add first a joke? And I heard it from Jean-Claude Juncker when I was Prime Minister of the Grand Duchy, the Duchy of Luxembourg, Grand. And he was citing the Chinese Prime Minister in a press conference in Beijing. And Jean-Claude said, he said, China and Luxembourg, 1 billion, 300 million, and 300,000 inhabitants. We are the biggest trading nation in the world. But the simple fact that he was received by the Chinese Prime Minister showed that he was just more than only the Prime Minister of a small country. He was actually representing much more. He was actually part of the European Union, part of the European Union. To the ambassador of Montenegro, just one word. You're right, and I said some countries are more equal than others. But I lived in the European Council through very different situations where there was no agreement between France and Germany. Sometimes there was, sometimes there was not, and so on. And there is a dynamic in the meeting that you shouldn't underestimate. It is not so that when France and Germany said it has to be that way, that everybody is following. It helps, of course, it helps. But there is a real discussion. There is a decision-making process. So I agree that you have to put nuances, and France and Germany plays a big role. But it is a necessary condition, but it is not a sufficient condition to get an agreement.
And let me just add, on the international scene, Germany alone is not a big country. France alone is not a big country. And I think the UK, with their global UK, they are just discovering now that they are alone not a big country. And Herman, you mentioned it, size matters. And I think this is something which we have to be very conscious in the European Union. And with all the examples you have given, that's what we have to transport to our partners, either for cooperation or also to get respect. Because diplomacy is not, you're not everybody's darling all the time. That's not how it works. You have to see where are limits, and I think there I also liked your comparison that we are a global actor, but we are not a world power. But a global actor will only get respect if you argue your case and if you stand your case. And we can only do that if we are 27, and if we do it alone, we are lost. And I think this is something we have to have in mind. And I think it is also where whoever joins a national diplomatic service, I think you will figure out very quickly how nice it is to be in a bigger family, especially if you are abroad.
Thank you again so much. We have another question of rather geopolitical nature, and this is especially with the close ties to Asia that we have been witnessing. Under Barack Obama, the United States did their pivot to Asia, and then, of course, relations soured a bit under the Trump administration. And now the question is, how do you see the EU engaging with Asia, pivoting towards Asia, possibly with the conclusion of many trade deals with countries in this countries in this area, but at the same time, also, of course, with very close relations to China. And this is a question for the European Union, but also Europe in general and countries within Europe pivoting towards Asia. Thank you.
Ambassador Hryden was serving in Asia.
Well, I would say that the European Union has pivoted in its own way to Asia already, I would say, from 2010-12 onwards. But I make a big jump forward. If I look at the time after 2016, when we had our global strategy, in the implementation of it, and also in order to have more of our strategic autonomy and recognizing the growing importance of Asia, there was quite a focus on Asia, which went beyond China. An important step, of course, was the 2019 policy paper on China, where the European Union had these three categories. China can be a partner, a competitor, or a rival. So it looked at Asia and as China, not in the way we want it to be, but the way it is. I think that was important. The indivisibility of security got into the minds of policymakers, and we have another policy paper which is called Enhancing Security Cooperation in and with Asia, where we are reaching out to our Asian partners. And if you just think for a moment, where are the hotspots of that world? Well, we have the Korean Peninsula, of course, with North Korea, but we have Hong Kong, we have Taiwan, we have border clashes between India and China. We have Japan, which is trying to find its way, and we have India, which is trying to come back and be a major player. And President Van Rompuy has given the long-term perspective that India will become an important player. So from that point of view, I think we have the awareness. We have to make sure that we have an Asia policy and not a China policy. It's one of my mantras to say you cannot have an Asia policy without a China policy, but only a China policy is not an Asia policy. And I would say Asia is a prime example where the European Union has to be united, to have one foreign policy, because otherwise we are small and we are losing out against China. We are small and losing out in the future against India. So if we want to stand our course, we have to be together. And I think the next indication will be in about, for the next Foreign Affairs Council in April, an Indo-Pacific strategy will be presented, which is just another sign that attention is paid. At the same time, we will have to see that we can cooperate with the United States where our interest meets. They will not meet everywhere, because despite being an ally in the transatlantic relationship, we are also competitors when it comes to economics, also in Asia. So I think if we put all that together, unity will be necessary. Otherwise, we will be weak in Asia, and not today, but also tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. I had the occasion to discuss this topic with Michael Reiter recently, so I have nothing to add. Simply this: that Asia is also on the move. You have this growing power, growing strength of China, but there is also in Asia a growing awareness in other countries that they have not to contain China, but in any case to defend themselves better. And so there is a growing cooperation between Japan, between Korea, with India. There is not a movement of, let's say, surrounding China, but to work together with like-minded or more like-minded countries. So there is a lot of happening in Asia too, regarding China, but also regarding the European Union, because those countries are looking to the European Union. And we could conclude a free trade agreement with Japan in 2019. We are again resuming talks with India after 13 years, I think, of standstill. We have a free trade agreement with Vietnam. We are now negotiating with the ASEAN countries, the Southeast Asian countries. So they have already the status of strategic partner, but it's not impossible that we will try to have a free trade agreement with them too. Indonesia is one of the biggest countries in the world, part of ASEAN. So the situation in Asia is also on the move. And you will see from the side of the United States a much bigger engagement, but we should prevent the world to fall into the trap again of a Cold War, of a system where a country has to make a choice between China and the United States. That is, and I said it also in my introduction, that is not our policy. We are firm on our principles. We are still open to dialogue. We can work together with the United States on some issues, but at the end of the day, it is the European Union who decide on its own interests. Madame Merkel said very clearly after the European Council of the day before yesterday, we have a lot in common with the United States, but we have not always the same interests. And this is clearly stated. It's also this strategic, a part of this strategic autonomy that we are proclaiming. And this strategic autonomy is, I think, the most important new dimension of foreign policy for the European Union of the last decades. But we have to act accordingly. It shouldn't be only a theoretical concept. We have to put the means to achieve that kind of strategic autonomy in all kinds of areas. But here also regarding China, we have some sensitivities in common with the United States, but not all. And then we will decide on which we work together with the United States and on which we are not working together with them.
Yes, and just to add, I think Mr. Borrell always puts it, we have to learn to talk the language of power. I always agree with that, but you need the power behind the language. Otherwise, you don't have credibility. So this is where we have to work, and the power comes from unanimity. That unanimity, not in the sense of voting, but the unanimity that the 27 have an agreed position and stand behind it, unwavering, resisting all the efforts of divide et impera, which you can see all the time. Otherwise, we don't have power, And if you don't have power, you cannot talk the language of power.
Ambassador Sharkic, is there anything you want to add on
Well,
China relations?
I will join to the person I admire very much, that is Jean-Claude Juncker, former president, what he said to the Chinese. I will, as we are about as big maybe as Luxembourg, maybe a little bit bigger, but China, putting joke on the side, China is very much present in the Western Balkan. There are huge investments, loan arrangements like one in Montenegro for the infrastructure, but there are also investments of China in Belgium. They put 4 billion euros in Bank Paribas here, investment in port of Thessaloniki in Greece, the bridge in Croatia, etc., etc. What I want to say, to have a regulated relationship between such a big players like China on one side and the European Union and all the other members, for us it will help a lot, and of course we will be delighted to join the European Union on all efforts what they are doing.
Yep. Thank you very much. And as our final question, if we may, something that I think all of us listening would love to hear, and that's simply, what advice would you give in 1 or 2 sentences to young diplomats, young academics as ourselves, going into the world of work, either looking for a career in diplomacy or working for our governments, or just generally in employment in general? And then that will be our final question, and I think we'll be able to end the conference there. Perhaps Mr. Van Rompuy, we can start with yourselves, and then Ambassador Sharkic, and then finally with Professor Hryden.
Yeah, to give a good advice, always difficult, but I would say in general, keep always your mind, your heart open. Listen to what you see, what you hear. Never be blocked or full of prejudices, because that's what we are suffering from. Prejudices from all kinds. So we are open societies, we are open economies, we have open democracies, but you can, that's our main asset. But we can only survive as open societies when we have an open mind, when we have people who have that kind of quality. And my second advice is defend and promote Europe. That's our future. And of course, it is it's a difficult love, but it's worthwhile. So be open and keep the European spirit.
I gave you a couple of hints at the beginning, but I would just maybe add some other stuff. As a diplomat, you have to learn to listen. To listen is very important. To be positive, it is very important. To work on yourself, it is also very important. And my final one is, if you are joining the foreign ministry in a certain momentum, leave it. Go to some other things. Do some other things. See how the things are working somewhere else. Feel how it is difficult to make money between the 1st of in the month and the 30th in the month. It is easy to, when you know that you will get the salary every 1st. So that is extremely important, also to learn how you are spending your taxpayers' money. Believe in yourself, keep everything with a smile, and you'll be fine.
Well, I would say first, set yourself a goal, the goal which you want to achieve, but be flexible how you achieve it. There is hardly a straight line to get there. You might have to change jobs, you might have to change directions, but you need a goal. I have seen that in my own career. I have done all kinds of things in the Austrian service, in academia, and as a lawyer. But there was one goal, this engagement for international issues, and then joining, negotiating membership of Austria in the European Union, and then getting what Herman van Rompuy said, this European idea, the European bacillus, if you wish, and work for it. So that's important. And be principled. Don't change with the wind. It is not good for any personal relationship. It's not good for a professional relationship. It's not good for the European Union either. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of our wonderful speakers at our closing ceremony. Now, this ends our closing ceremony, and I would just love to say thank you very much, Mr. Herman van Rompuy, Ambassador Boyan Sharkic, and this distinguished Professor Michael Hryden for joining us at this closing ceremony.
Also, I want to extend my thanks to all panelists and also to all participants and attendees. And we herewith close the College of Europe Annual Student Conference on Diplomacy. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you again. We do have videos as well. This has been recorded, as has some of our